Hi, everyone. People are still trickling in, so let's give it about 30 more seconds while everyone's logging on. Okay, I think in the interest of time, I'm going to get started. If people log on a little late, they won't miss too much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome to Senior Future Planning Night. My name is Ms. King. I've been a guidance counselor at Belmont High for about 9 years now. I'm joined by two of my wonderful colleagues, Mr. Paul Pitts and Miss Anya Houston. You'll hear from them a little bit later. Some about our webinar, right? So this is clearly Google Meet. We've shut off a lot of the features, which you'll notice. If you want to write a question, you are going to use the Q&A feature. We may have time to address some questions at the end, but we will also send out a printed copy of all the questions and the answers sometime next week. We'll also send out this PowerPoint and this recording so you can refer back to it. And another note about raising your hand, please don't. We don't have the capabilities to answer questions in real time, so please utilize the Q&A feature. Without further ado, Mr. Pitts, next slide. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of our department. You can see in the parentheses, those are sort of the beginnings of last name. So if you're not familiar with your child's guidance counselor, please take a look here. Some new-ish faces. We welcome Miss Houston here permanently, which is great. She took over for Miss Putney's caseload. We also have Mr. Alan Chang. He's covering for Miss Urquhart. She's out on maternity leave till about Thanksgiving. Otherwise, these people should look familiar to you. You also may be in contact with Ms. Carol Skepa this year. She's our registrar, and she handles pretty much all of our transcripts. So she's such a huge help, and we couldn't do this without her. Next slide. Okay, so some general information. This week we had the pleasure of going into senior English classes, and we did a lot of this content. So your child should be exposed to this information, but as a mother myself, I know how that goes. So some things we did in class, we reviewed their transcript. Every child got to see their transcript, sign off on it, give us kind of the green light to send it. We also shared with them a senior folder. Okay, so ask your child about the senior folder. Say, do you know how to access it? For you guys to know, it should be posted on their guidance counselor's Google Classroom, and then it's also available through our website. Oh, and I'm sorry, I didn't know the slide said these specifics. So we already went over the general questions, okay? And then please reach out to your guidance counselor if you have any specific questions about your child. Okay, so some objectives tonight, right? So graduation requirements, what does your child need to graduate? Future planning options, what do we do in this process? And then college application, the big ones, and financial aid procedures. Yep, next slide. Okay, so here's a snapshot of our graduation requirements. Hopefully your child's been enrolled in at least 6.5 courses each semester every year. There's always exceptions to this rule, and if that covers for your child, you know about it. Another note about these graduation requirements that I like to tell the kids is we are tracking them, but it's so nice to track them, to have the ownership on the student as well, to make sure that they're meeting the graduation requirements. And that's one of the reasons we show them their transcripts. So really quickly, every student will graduate with 100 credits. That includes 4 years of English, 4 years of math, 4 years of science, 3 years of social studies, 2 years of foreign language, one fine and performing art. And just a note of PE, I love to highlight this one. Your senior should be getting 2 credits for PE, okay? And that can look a little different, whether they're doing 2 BHS sports, whether they're in 1 semester long class, and some students are even either doing a BHS sport and an independent study or a year-long independent study. Those words might not mean much to you, but please ask your student what they're doing, just to make sure that they know what they're doing for PE and it's reflected on their transcript. Community service, that's one that kids put off for a long time. So please check in with your child to make sure that they're doing community service, that they're logging it in using our app. Ask them about the app. Those 40 hours need to be in before anyone graduates. And then just MCAS review, right? So in 10th grade, they took English and math, and in 9th grade, they took science. Of course, your child could be on a different path, but they need all 3 before they graduate. Okay, so this is a nice snapshot of options you have after graduation. Full disclosure, this slideshow is really heavily geared towards students applying to college, mostly 4 years. But I always talk to my children about other options, right? So if your student is down a different path, please encourage them to reach out to us. We want to be a part of that journey. We want to help them no matter what they're thinking about. So we're here for them. And there are other options that we're happy to talk to you about as well. Next slide. Okay, and that's a perfect segue into making an appointment with us. Okay, so we stress students to make a senior appointment. I have a ton of students on my caseload working with private college counselors. They make my job easier, but I still want to know what they're doing. So tell them to come down, share their list with us. We love to strategize. We love to just make sure they're caught up with their essay and supplements and they know what to do next. Part of what we went over in senior English classes, and we'll go over tonight as well, is all the forms that students need to do for this process. It's so helpful. They hear it in class, but having those one-on-one conversations with us really hits home. So I've had a couple of students go to English class, come meet with me, and they're like, can you go over the forms again? That's perfect. We just want to know what your student is up to and how we can help them. Next slide. Okay, and Naviance. They've been hopefully using Naviance since sophomore year. Sophomore year, we did some career exploration stuff. Junior year, we showed them Naviance and how they can use it as a search engine, which is a great purpose for Naviance. And these are just some ways that they can still research colleges. Just a note, kids are on all sorts of different paths, right? So if your student wants to apply to college but doesn't know where to yet, here are just some ways and some tools that they can use in Naviance to still fine-tune their list and figure out where they want to apply. Naviance is super important this year because it's how we send letters of recommendation, transcripts, and any school reports. So it goes from being a search engine to a sending vehicle. Just a great resource. Ask your kid about it. Next slide. Okay, college search specifically demonstrated interest, right? So some schools, specifically like small to mid-sized schools, really want to see your student reaching out or making an effort to learn more about campus. This shows the school that the student is interested in them, right? The Common App makes it so easy to apply, and colleges have to send out all these acceptances. They want to make sure if they send out an acceptance, that student is going to go there. So what are some ways to demonstrate interest? Going in person on a college tour, information session, great ways for you and your child to demonstrate interest and for them to learn more about campus. There's virtual ways to show interest. Thanks to COVID, a lot of colleges offer virtual tours, etc. Definitely check out the college's webpage to see if there's any of these offerings, especially if the college is far away. You can also sign up for college admissions virtual visits. So we offer so many of those a day. Your student can find the schedule on Naviance and just go over the schedule with your student, see who's coming, and make sure the student is signing up for those top colleges, those colleges that they're really interested in. college interviews. Some colleges offer them, some colleges don't. Check the website. I always say to kids, college interviews are never a negative, right? They're either a positive or a neutral. So go for it, especially if you're interested in the college. Check their website to see if they offer it and what their process is. And then following up is just a good rule of thumb for college and for life, right? So if they do attend a college tour or one of those rep visits, send the admissions counselor that you met with a quick note saying that you enjoyed it, picking out one thing that happened either in the presentation or in the tour. It's just nice. And all of these things are trying to connect your child's name with the institution and the admissions rep. Next slide. Okay, and just a bigger slide about the college rep visits, right? So one important thing that I want to tell you guys as the families of the students do need to be called out to attend these visits, okay? So they're around 30 to 45 minutes. They happen through the school day, unfortunately, so sometimes your student will miss class. Just call the attendance line, explain your students going to a college visit, and they won't be marked as skipping or anything like that. Have your student bring their laptop, Chromebook. They can set up in a quiet space in the library or one of the corners of the school, and then they can just log on and attend their visit. Next slide. And I think at this point, hand it over to Miss Houston. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. King. And I'm thrilled to be back at BHS. I was here actually last year filling in for Miss Ross. So for those students that have like A through C last names, I probably worked with your students last year. And now I am back for Miss Putney permanently. And so I'm very excited to be working with those students. So I just do want to do a little shout out again for Q&As. So in order to sort of find where the Q&A is, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there's a little triangle thing that says activities. You click on that. Then there's a button that says Q&A, and you can go ahead and click on that and then write your question. And we'll be keeping track of those. And again, we're going to try to, if we have time at the end, answer some of those questions and then send out the others on a document, written questions. So I want to start out by talking about the different pieces of the college application, the different components. And this slide really breaks it down into the student pieces and then what we sort of take care of here at Belmont. So obviously the student pieces are including, you know, the application, the information about the student's resume and activities and essay. They are also responsible for if they want to send their standardized tests, they can do that. We're going to be talking a little bit more about standardized tests later in the presentation. Obviously, the application fee. If your student has a special talent or is applying for, you know, performing arts or a different program, there might be extra essays or other things that they may have to do for that program. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the teacher recommendation list and the forms that your student needs to fill out so that we can send our things from our office. So the things that we're responsible for, we will make sure that a student's transcript, their counselor recommendation, with every transcript is also a school profile, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few slides, and just information about Belmont High School, giving context for every transcript that leaves our office. All right, so the application, we're going to, you know, really focus mostly on the Common App. There are other applications out there. You know, some colleges require their own application. For example, the University of California schools have their own system, but mostly I would say most students are going to be using the Common App to apply to most of their schools. And so this is, you know, the basic information that's included in the Common App. Your student may, if you haven't seen their Common App yet, may have to sit down with you. There is some family information that I think is very detailed, and a lot of students don't necessarily know, what year if your parent went to college, what year they graduated and where they went, and, you know, what's the name of their company they work for and things like that. So you may get some of those questions. But there's also, you know, they're going to be putting in their educational information, testing if they decide to submit testing. There's an activity section, and then the writing piece, which is the main essay. So those are all the different components of the Common Application that they'll be focusing on for the most part. I wanted to talk a little bit about deadlines. So there's a lot of different types of deadlines. And I think for each student and each family, different deadlines work for them. I always try to tell students to really focus on their own process and not try to get caught up with, what deadlines their friends are applying, and really focus on themselves and what makes the most sense for them. So there are a variety of early deadlines and then a variety of later deadlines. So depending on where your student is in the process, there'll definitely be a good deadline for them. So just a couple different options. So early action is an early deadline, and it can range between, October 15th and basically November 15th. The benefits of early action really are for the student. If a student's have completed a lot of their application, they're ready to send their application in, then if you send it in early, then you'll hear a little bit early because you typically will get an answer somewhere between mid-December and mid-January. So, and it's not binding, which we'll talk about early decision, which is the binding option. So, that's a really can benefit a student because if you hear a little bit early, then you have more time to maybe revisit schools, maybe compare financial aid packages, and really make an informed decision. There's also restrictive early action for some schools. So Harvard is one of those schools that has restrictive early action. And what that means is it's early action in the fact that a student is non-binding. So a student doesn't need to go there if they received an acceptance, but there is restriction on being able to apply to other private schools early action. Typically, most schools say, yes, you can apply to UMass or public schools, but you can't apply to any other private schools. Again, there's not many of these colleges that offer restrictive early action, but you do want to be aware if one of those schools is on your students list. And then the other early option is early decision. So similar deadlines to early action, but the difference is it's binding. So you can only apply to one school early decision. If you are accepted, you must go there. Your financial aid isn't necessarily always known at this point. So that can be a factor for some families and whether they choose early decision or not. I do advise families to check out what's called the net price calculator on the college that they may be considering for early decision. You can put in some basic financial information, and from there, you can kind of get a sense of what your financial aid package might be. So you can find the net price calculator on any financial aid website on the college. Within the college's webpage. So in terms of early decision, there is a contract that needs to be signed. So as the student will sign it, basically saying, I know this is binding. You as a parent will sign it, and then us as counselors also sign it. You are allowed to apply early action at the same time. As early decision, it just means that if you get in early decision, then you would just have to withdraw your applications for early action. So we'll go to the next slide to talk a little bit more about the regular deadlines. So there's rolling deadlines, which basically means that you can apply up until a certain deadline. And, as they make decisions, they're going to roll out those decisions. It's always best to apply as early as you can for rolling because, again, they're building their class and they're only going to accept as many students as they have room for. Regular decision is sort of what we sort of grew up having with, really more of a January 1st, January 15th deadline. And then there's obviously open enrollment with community colleges where there aren't any necessary admission requirements other than, a high school diploma. And we can certainly help your student with those as well. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit now about the pieces of the application that we'll be in charge of sending out for your student. So this is just a snapshot of the GPA scale and more information about the transcript. So the GPA is an average of the three. So basically when students are applying, we're going to be sending out a transcript that has their freshman, sophomore, and junior courses and grades, as well as their senior courses. And that's just because we're not going to necessarily, if a student is applying early, for example, have their first quarter grades. We will follow up with the first quarter grades, but the GPA that's going to be provided is just going to be through the end of junior year. We do an unweighted GPA. So we are not necessarily accounting for the honors or AP courses if your student decided to take those. However, that being said, the colleges do definitely look at the rigor of courses that your student takes. So most colleges, I actually came from the college admission world before being a guidance counselor. And in my experience, I would say pretty much every college has their own weighting system to how they review the academics of a student. So they are looking at the level of classes students are taking and their grades, and they're giving it their own weight and their own weighting system. So they can kind of compare kids across different high schools and across different states and even countries. So we do give them an unweighted GPA on a 4.0 scale. And then once you get, once we're sending first quarter grades, the GPA will be recalculated based on those first quarter grades and the quarter two grades as well. So again, what colleges look at, they're looking at how students have performed, but also what they've taken advantage of, where they've challenged themselves. And, not every student's, they don't expect every student's transcript to be perfect, right? And so if there are bumps along the way, just being able to explain that as part of the application, and then just showing that if, a student has struggled, that they've been able to sort of show improvement over their high school career, and showing the upward trend is always very impressive for colleges. Okay, so how do you get your transcript to colleges? So as Ms. King mentioned, the senior folder, all of these documents that we're going to be talking about live in the senior folder. So all your students have access to them. So in order to get a transcript sent to any school, they must fill out this form, which is called a transcript release form. Once it's filled out, it basically, students are going to list the name of their college and their deadline. Then they're going to email it to Ms. Skepa in the guidance office. And this will cover us sending all grades. So as I mentioned, we're going to send the initial transcript that has freshman through junior year grades. Then when first quarter grades are available, we'll make sure those get sent. When mid-year grades are available, we'll make sure those get sent. And then a final transcript when your child decides where they're going to attend. So there also is a $10 payment processing fee. It helps us pay for Naviance. So that can be either cash or check. And also it's important to note that students can fill out more than one transcript release form. So maybe they only know right now, I'm going to apply to a couple schools, early action. I'm still figuring out my regular. That's totally fine. They can fill out another form. They don't have to pay the $10 again. That covers everything. So they can fill out another form and get that sent to Ms. Skepa as well later on. We ask that these forms get sent to Ms. Skepa 3 weeks before the child's first deadline. Okay. Also, just a note there on the bottom, in order to be able to actually send the transcript, the colleges need to be listed within Naviance under colleges I'm applying to. As part of the class this week, we're actually connected students' Common App accounts with their Naviance, so it kind of talks to them. But this is all information that your student is hearing as well, and we will reemphasize when we meet with them individually. All right, so these are the dates that I mentioned. So this is roughly, I would say, that 3 week period like we mentioned. So if your student has an October 1st or October 15th deadline, hopefully we already know about it. If not, then this form needs to be done ASAP. But you can kind of see what the main deadlines are. It is important to note that you'll see with January 1st, that the deadline is actually December 1st. So that's about a month instead of 3 weeks. And I just wanted to mention it's because of that holiday break. So, we're not available to send things, and neither is Ms. Skepa over the holiday break. So we want to make sure that those get sent to your schools, to the students' schools before we leave for the break. And this, again, is in the senior folder, so your students have access to being able to look at these dates. All right. So I kind of already talked a little bit about this, but basically, this is just more detailed information about grades and when we're sending them. So, for Q1 grades, for this class of 2025, they're going to close on November 1st. And then we have to make sure that they're all ready to go out and everything looks good. And so it does take a little bit of time, but grades will be sent out starting on November 12th from Ms. Skepa. If a student feels like they maybe need a little bit more time to hand in, maybe they have a last minute assignment that needs to get handed in, or they need to work out a grade, or something's wrong on their transcript, a student can certainly reach out to Ms. Skepa to let her know, and we can hold grades for a short period of time if that's helpful. But typically we just, once a student fills out that transcript release form, we make sure that those grades get sent to colleges. And it is important to note that colleges, even if it's, you have a November 1st deadline, they're okay with receiving them, a couple weeks later. It's one of those things that most schools are having, their quarters are ending around the same time. So they're used to that, which is totally fine. And that's why, again, we send that initial transcript, so they do have some information at least to get them started. And then we already sort of talked about when we send mid-year grades, and all of that information, and then what final grades are as well. Okay, so another sort of component to all of this, with every transcript that leaves BHS also goes a school profile. This is a snapshot of the school profile. It is also in the senior folder, so your student can review it. And so basically what it is it's a document where it just tells more about Belmont High School. It's super important when these college admission counselors are reviewing a student's transcript to understand the context of where they're coming from, right? So they want to know, what is our grading scale? They want to know what classes are offered. So all of that information is included, so they can really understand, okay, what did the student take? What is being offered to them? What did they take advantage of? And how did they do? How did they perform? So this is a document, like I said, that gets sent with every transcript. And it is a super important document that I know when I used to review applications, I would read every year, because schools are changing all the time. Yeah. Next slide. Okay, so then the other component is recommendations. So there's a couple different types of recommendations. So the first one is that we, as your student's guidance counselor, will be writing a recommendation. It is really important that if your student has not completed their student questionnaire, that they do it as soon as possible, especially if you have a November 1st or a November 15th deadline. Again, we ask for that 3 weeks prior, so we have time. We all have a lot of seniors, and so we do like to try to space that out and be able to write the strongest recommendation that we can. There's also a parent brag sheet that is available in the senior folder. Ask your student about it. Again, it can be really helpful to us. We would love to hear from you and what you can share about your student, but we also understand that parents are busy, so it's not a requirement by any means. But again, if you'd like to share some information, I always welcome it. And I know we all do. It's really helpful. And, if the transcript release form and the student questionnaire, all of that is submitted 3 weeks before the deadline, then we'll make sure everything gets there right in time. The other component is the teacher recommendation. So last spring, your student asked 2 teachers for recommendations. And if they haven't and they need to find another teacher rec, definitely have them touch base with their counselor as soon as possible. There is another form in the senior folder. It's called the teacher recommendation form. And basically what it is, it's very similar to the transcript release their deadlines, and they'll give that to their teacher, again, 3 weeks before the deadline. Teachers actually submit their own recommendations through Naviance, so that list is super helpful for them to be able to know exactly where they're sending the recommendation and when they're sending the recommendation. And then sometimes we get questions about supplemental recommendations. So this could be if your student works and has a boss or plays a sport outside of school and has a coach, certainly you can include that as it's not required, but if it's something that you feel like your student, the recommendation would give a different perspective than like the guidance counselor or the teachers, and I would say, it could be a good option, but again, not required. There is a process for doing that, and we can certainly meet with your student and help them. It happens through the Common App because it's a little different of a process. But again, if that applies to your child, just have them mention it to us when they meet with us, and we can help them with that. All right, so this is the recommendation form that I just mentioned. Again, really simple, just a list of colleges and the deadlines. And again, 3 weeks before the first deadline to give that to the teacher so they can send through Naviance. And I think my time is up. All right, so I'm going to pass the baton over to Mr. Pitts.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again. It's nice to see you all. We are making incredible time. And just because of that, I think it would be very important for us to all kind of come together, take a deep breath, and realize that this is a stressful process. It's a stressful process for teachers and counselors. I'll be transparent about that. And it's a stressful process for the students. And of course, it's a stressful process for you, and that's okay. So once again, let's take a deep breath. Maybe close your eyes, envision a happy place. Maybe you're going to Disney. Oh, I see it every single day. I try to think about those positive moments in your life. And one of those for you will be your students both graduating June 7th and walking, getting their diploma, and then moving off to college, which can also be very sad. We understand, but will be great opportunities for them. And we're here to help. So I just want to hopefully relieve some of that stress before I go back into the slides and assure you that we have your back. We have your students' back. We want their success. We want them to succeed, and we do not give up on them here at Belmont High School. I'm so happy to be here. This is my second year. I started here last year, and it's an incredible school district, and all of the team is here to help. And we all help each other too, which is awesome. So just one final reminder before I go back into the slides. We are going to talk about standardized testing and some financial aids. As a reminder, we'll have some time for a Q&A at the end of this presentation. Because we're on Google Meet now, we don't have Zoom anymore. We have that alternative format where to access the Q&A feature, you can do it currently. Some of you have already asked some questions and we're keeping them in a document. You go to the little shapes, if you're on a computer in the bottom right-hand corner, which is activities, and then you click on Q&A, you'll be able to ask your questions. And like I said, we're keeping a running log that not only if we have some time, we'll answer some of them at the end of this presentation, but we'll also supply you with the questions and answers that were asked throughout. So thank you so much. All right, well, here we go. Standardized testing. I'm sure many of your students already have. Maybe that's not the case. That's okay. If they haven't already taken the SATs, they probably should. I think it would be really great. Most of the seniors, I think, on my caseload, and I think it's similar to all the counselors, already have. A good portion of them may be taking it one last time. Some of them are already registered for October 5th, which the deadline has already passed to register for that because it's, wow, like a week and a half, 2 weeks away. It's crazy how fast the year is flying. But there are a couple more dates for that as well. November 2nd and November 7th. So make sure you're paying attention to those deadlines to register because A, spots fill up at certain sites, especially Belmont High School, and B, if you miss the deadline, then you won't be able to take the test, of course. ACT as well, there is an October 26th date, which the deadline has passed for, but if you're going to be taking it, or if your student, I should say, is going to be taking it in December, the deadline is upcoming in November, so keep your eyes on that. And school choice, this is really important, right? So not all schools require taking or submitting the test scores, right? A lot of schools have gone back, admittedly. It was, during COVID, during the pandemic, a lot of them went completely test optional. Over the past couple of years, schools have kind of gone back and required the testing again. Most of the Ivy Leagues have gone back to that, for example. And it's kind of up to a student to submit to those test optional schools. Of course, the ones that they're required to, they have to send to, but it's really important for them to be on top of that as well. So if a school requires it, they're going to need to send it. So if they didn't get an SAT score that they really want to get, maybe they should try to take it again, or realize they're going to have to submit it to apply to those schools and successfully, well, potentially get admitted to the schools. And I think the next slide covers it. So you actually, the student in you as a family unit will be sending those scores, and it's important to think about that and get it to the schools ahead of time and as soon as possible, because they can take some time to process. They're going to require, the ones that require it will request that official report sent in advance of the application deadline. So for example, if your application deadline is, November 1st, ahead of time, right, is before the 1st. You can do, if you're doing the SATs, you'll send that via College Board. And if you're doing the ACTs, you'll send it through the actstudent.org website. And if you're unsure about whether or not a school is requiring the scores, the college website will be able to tell you. We can also see some of that data on Naviance as well, so your student can come meet with us. It is a vast and ever-changing process, and schools are changing all of the time. I don't think anyone's going to change right at this point, but we had a lot over the summer and going into the summer that sent out announcements, hey, we're no longer test optional, we're going to require it again. So just bear that in mind. It may have changed if the list your student was making was back in, say, May, right? It's important to think about that just in case they're looking at some of those schools that now require it. But you can see a list of the test optional schools at fairtest.org. It's also another resource to just kind of go if navigating each college's website's a little difficult, because sometimes it can be. You can kind of get a global list. Use Control F. I love my little find feature to kind of go through those lists, get the colleges, type in their names. Pretty straightforward. And then it's up to the student whether or not they want to submit the SAT or the ACT if the school takes them. They don't really have too much of a weight difference. So I mean, I think that's an important conversation to have. If maybe they didn't do so hot on the SAT, but they did much better on the ACT, or vice versa. There's no necessarily right or wrong answer. Obviously, they test pretty much the same thing. The ACT is a little bit different, but if the school's going to take both, I think it's just a matter of which one did the student perform better on. That's kind of the decision. And they say they kind of weigh them equally. So, all right, financial aid is a big piece, right? Because even if you have all the money in the world, college costs a lot. And that number keeps going up every single year. It's wild. I was looking back at UMass Boston's tuition. That's where I went for undergraduate school from when I went. And I can't even imagine how, like, the percentage that it's gone up. It goes up every single year. Even when I was there, it was going up every year. And UMass Boston is one of the cheaper state schools around. So I can only imagine, the Tufts and the Northeasterns and the BUs, how much the tuition is now. It's definitely changed, especially if you as parents went to school in the 70s or 80s. It's completely changed the price of school. So there are resources available. Now, all students typically are going to be sending in that FAFSA. It was a disaster last year. The government rolled out this new program. And originally they were saying it was, I believe, like early November. And then it was, nope, that's not happening. Late November. Oh, that's not happening. Early December. And I don't even remember when it got announced, maybe like mid-January. It's a new online form. They've called it simpler for students and families to complete. I hope that's still the case. But what we are hoping is that it's going to be rolled out like in the December timeframe, early December. It's up to the federal government, of course. But if it gets out, you want to get that done as soon as possible. Students also should be doing that yearly with their university, because it's how colleges determine their financial packages for students, which don't only apply to incoming first-year students, right? Every single year, there might be merit scholarships. There could be all sorts of things that they offer, or maybe they get subsidizing at more money. And, there's many reasons to do it every single year. So it's good to get in the habit of that. And also, a school only has a certain amount of aid internally that they may provide, and that kind of gets washed up once they give it all out. So the earlier, the better for the FAFSA. But stay tuned. We post that in Google Classroom when it finally opens up. But you can obviously keep tabs on it as well. You'll see it somewhere or other. And then some private schools use a CSS profile as well. It's just a different type of financial aid form that certain schools require. typically, you know, I would say you would know, like, by going to the school's admissions page if they need the CSS profile, and that's probably the best way to do it. It's a very similar process, and there isn't a finite date right now, but sometime in the fall. So once again, once we get information about that, we'll post that in our Google Classrooms, but it's important to kind of keep that on your radar too if your student schools that they're applying to require or use the CSS financial aid profile. Take a look at their dates too. They may have specific dates that they need to buy, especially for the fall semester that students will be applying for. So obviously it's going to be a bit earlier, and there's a cutoff to when they can actually apply for financial aid. But even then, earlier the better. Get it done, get it out of the way, because it takes time too, right? Different families have different tax structures, finances, all sorts of things that you have to log in there. So take your time to sit down with your students, maybe over a weekend, and get the FAFSA done once it opens up. But state of Massachusetts, with its ups and downs, we do have a wonderful website, MIFA. It's the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, MIFA.org. They have so many amazing resources for students, for families, for just parents in general, about funding higher education, post-secondary education. There are awesome webinars that you can join that they have throughout the year. They have toolkits. They have information, frequently asked questions, all sorts of stuff, like tons and tons of resources available for free through the taxpayers of Massachusetts. It's a great website. There's a number you can call. I don't know their exact hours. I don't think we have that. But you know, you can take a look at their website, mifa.org. Please do so. Even if you feel like everything is pretty much stable for your student, it can be a helpful resource. There may be different opportunities that you're missing out on. I just got an electric lawnmower, and then I found out there was a rebate, $75 through Massachusetts, that I missed out on because I bought it and found out about it after. Well, there's a lot of money out there, and all I needed to do was apply for it. So MIFA will have access to those resources. Definitely do it. And like I said, the weekly information sessions or seminars are really, really great too. So go to the events page on mifa.org, and you'll find out some good information there. So post-applying, missing information, right? Mistakes happen, some things happen. It's okay. Students are responsible for adhering to those deadlines, right? They need to get their application in by the November 1st, the 15th, the 5th, the Januaries, whatever it may be. They need to apply. You as a family need to pay for the application unless there's a fee waiver involved, but there's still a process to that. And, they need to go and hit that button. It can be the most nervous thing. Once they do one, it'll be much easier, and they'll be like, oh, that was a big hurdle. Now it's just kind of let's get the rest in. They do take a little bit of time to process the application, right? They get tens and tens of thousands of applications. I think I was looking at statistics for Northeastern a couple of years ago, and it was like 90,000 applications. I don't know how they process that many. I can't fathom that many students applying to Northeastern, but hey, it happens. So it's not going to happen in a day. There is a little bit of wiggle room, as Ms. Houston mentioned, with the teacher recommendations, transcripts. Like, there's a little bit of flexibility there, wiggle room for information to get sent. Colleges understand. But make sure you're looking at it. College Board's really great. I love College Board because as you go through not College Board, Common App. Common App is really great. I always say the two combined. Common App's really great because every school you go to, you click on the little tab, you have a drop down, and then you have these wonderful green check marks. If you see a green check mark, you're good. Same thing under the main Common App piece. When you put your essay in, check mark, done. FERPA waiver, check mark, done. Everything's good to go. You see those green check marks? You're good. You're good. The student's solid. So I usually recommend my students just look for those green check marks. If you don't see a green check mark, there's something you didn't do. Maybe it's just hitting the button. Maybe it's answering a yes or no box that had an asterisk, right? There's reasons why. Kind of go through that process, right? We will obviously, if we catch anything, and Ms. Gep is amazing. She's a lifesaver for our department. She is the heart and blood and soul of the guidance department at BHS. She notices things all the time. We also notice things as guidance counselors. We will work our magic, get everything solved as fast as we possibly can. But if you as parents have any changes or need to know, great resource to reach out to Ms. Gepa just in case anything kind of comes up through the application process as we get those applications in. It should be pretty seamless, but there are bumps in the road. That's just expected. So hopefully it doesn't happen. Final decision. That's the moment that we're all looking for, right? Obviously, graduation is going to be monumental for you as parents, but But final decision, I think it's huge as well, and it comes before, right? We're talking May, as opposed to June. It's a whole month before, and it's a huge moment, especially if your student, maybe they didn't do ED, but they have a handful of EA schools that they're looking for, and they got into a few schools. Sometimes that can be a tricky decision. If they get an accepted, they'll get into the school, and they can choose to go in on decision day in May. They might also get a denial, which happens. It's okay. Everyone goes through that process. I tell my students, how do you deal with rejection? That's the first question I ask them with the college process, because it's going to happen, and it's better to be aware of it than to have it just happen to you and sort of slap you in the face, and throw you off your rockers. So I would say be prepared for rejection as a student and a family. And it's okay. You'll get into school. Like I said at the beginning of this, we got your back. We're gonna get those students into a dream school that they want to be in. We're gonna do our best to help them and make sure they're set for the future. There are a couple of other things that might happen when a school reports back the applications that a student put in. They could get a deferral, which usually as part of the EA/ED outcomes, it will be sort of pushed aside into the regular decision round, right? And then it will be kind of reviewed again. In that process, if you get a deferral and the student really wants to go to that school, they need to kind of put all of the energy into that demonstrated interest that we were talking about at the beginning. I can't remember if it was Ms. King or Ms. Houston that was talking about demonstrated interest, but definitely do that, right? Additionally, I tell all my students, you got to stay strong in school all the way throughout the whole senior year. The second quarter grades are going to be considered in that process too, generally speaking. It does depend on deadlines when they fall, because quarter two ends like at the end of January. But if they're going to be reviewing those, it's very important to have the student have a very strong second quarter as well. I want them to have a strong third and fourth quarter too. But in terms of the college process, make sure they're staying strong, make sure they're reaching out to teachers, all that stuff that we talk about all the time as guidance counselors. Make sure they're communicating, doing the work, and reaching out if they're struggling, reaching out to us, reaching out to the teachers. Like, we want to be there to help. And teachers don't want to see them kind of lose out on an application because maybe they, didn't do as well on a test or something like that. So second quarter, really important. And then waitlisted too. Waitlisted can look like a couple of different things, but generally speaking, what it means is a student is on a wait list. I don't know a better way to describe it, right? With course registrations, we have wait lists too. Sometimes the courses are really popular, and it's sort of a priority list. But same thing, demonstrated interest. Go to those visits if there are more visits. Go to the virtual tours if you can go to the tours. Reach out to the admissions officials. There are some other options that we can look into too. If a student gets waitlisted, we can show letters of continuing interest. Certain schools like MIT require the students to complete their own sort of letter of continued interest. I can't remember exactly the name of what it's called, but they have their own system that they use. Different schools may also get another letter from their guidance counselor or teacher. That could be something that's an option too. There are different ways to sort of show that demonstrated interest and really show as a school that we want that to happen. But ultimately, the wait list may come back eventually as accepted or denied. There's no real way to tell. Our only recommendation is show that you want to be there as a student, and that will kind of help along the process. So May 1st, as I mentioned, that's the day. It's decision day. It's coming. We're only in September, but believe it or not, y'all are going to blink, and we're going to be at that moment where the student has to decide on the schools. And we look forward to celebrating with our students the schools that they choose to go to, and then preparation for graduation. There are tons of different factors, especially if a student got into a handful of schools, that may determine whether or not they want to go to that school. Financial costs, as I mentioned before, pretty heavy, right? A school may offer a really great financial package, and that can just be incentive alone, right? Maybe you got a full ride, or you got 50%, or whatever it may be. That can be a huge motivator to determine that school, especially if they've kind of weighed the option and picked all schools that match the majors that they want to study. Maybe it is just a prestigious institution that they got into, and that's really why they want to go to school. I think it's really important to put your foot on the campus, step on the ground. A lot of people we have a lot of students go to UMass Amherst, and a lot of people love that school. solely because they have like the #1 ranked cafeteria in the country. Like apparently their food is amazing at UMass Amherst. That could be a reason. Seems silly, but honestly, they're going to be living there, and that's like an important reason to students. Maybe the dorms are phenomenal. Maybe they have a lot of student activities. Totally different reasons for different students and their goals, but those can be important factors as well. But hey, talk to us, talk to you. You know, we encourage the students to talk to their family as well, because they can learn the experience. If you went to college, or maybe you have extended family who went to college, there are many different places to go to. Maybe they want to talk to their chemistry teacher if they're planning on studying chemistry anyways, and they can get some insight. Talk, communicate. It's like very, very important to ultimately make the decision for this next step of their life. And then, yeah, lists of pros and cons. If you like to plot those things out, sometimes it's just a matter of balancing out one over the other. You know, they use that. A lot of students do that in determining the schools they want to apply for. But if they get into a few schools, they'll need to do that for the schools they're going to decide too. And that can be a very helpful strategy to make that pretty monumental decision that they're going to choose come May 1st. Excuse me. But as I mentioned, money can be a big thing, but there are scholarships. It's not just in-house merit. It's not just financial aid. There are many different ways for students to get a few bucks here and a few bucks there. It seems like such a small percentage, and sometimes it is, but hey, anything helps, right? College books can be $600, $700, $800 at times. So if you get a scholarship for $500, that's half of your college textbook. Hey, it's something. And I think that that's the important thing to remember. In Naviance, as we get information about new scholarships, we go through and we post them. I don't think there's anything live there now, but they come throughout the year. The bulk of them will come towards the new year into the spring. In addition to like those general scholarships that we have that we get information about, we'll also have the in-house scholarships and the town of Belmont scholarships. And those are really important for students to apply to. Because there's a very good chance that they'll get something by applying to it. Not a guarantee, but I think the pool of candidates, you know, that apply for that really do have the opportunity to get, because there's a lot of different scholarships that like in-house and in the town of Belmont that is given to students. I can't remember the number that we gave out last year, but it was a lot of different ones. So we had a lot of students that we were able to kind of pick and choose for those scholarships. It's a really great opportunity that the scholarship committee gets to do. College websites as well, you can kind of look through. Ms. Houston mentioned the net price calculator, and that's really a great tool just for a general overview, but also take a look at like some of the merit-based scholarships that they have, the requirements. Some may require students to maintain a certain GPA. They may get it after their freshman year. They may get it going in. There are different reasons that a school gives out merit-based scholarships. So if there's an application for it, which sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't, sometimes it's just kind of granted to a student based on certain criteria. But be aware of those. It's helpful to do the research on the actual schools themselves to get an idea of what a school may give. Some schools, some private schools, end up being the cost of a state school just because they give so much merit or scholarships. I know Leslie University, it's where my wife went for grad school. They give a lot of money in-house. Everyone gets a scholarship that goes to that school essentially, and it ends up being relatively reasonable compared to, you know, a state school versus, you know, a private institution like a BU that's can be very expensive if you don't get any sort of scholarships or financial aid. And then there are a plethora of websites. Google is your friend, but also with scholarships, I would actually advise you be a little careful because there's a lot of marketing involved by just doing a general Google search, doing college scholarships. College Board has some great websites that you can go to. There's also College Greenlight, fineaid.org, FastWeb. I think MIFA also has some resources about scholarships. So keep your eyes posted on those and use those search tools just so you don't get marketed to. I think with some of those websites, you have to sign up and then you get spam emails. It can be, you know, like I think scholarships.org is one that will just spam you. And it can be hard because they list national scholarships. There could be tens of thousands of scholarships. And then you have to weed out what my student qualifies for. You know, they might have specific criteria about gender or background or major that they're studying, or do they have a family who's a firefighter, or, you know, like all of those weird things that happen. There are scholarships for everything. So that's one other tip that I want to give. If you are a member of like a religious organization or even a secular organization, right? Like those organizations may actually have some scholarships that they give students. If it's more of a national kind of congregation, it's worth checking out. Maybe you're in a credit union, or maybe you have a family member who's in a firefighters union, right? There are some scholarships available for that too. So be aware. I have a student I think their parent works for Toyota. So there's an in-house Toyota scholarship, right? Think about those businesses. Maybe you work for a company you don't even know. Look at your company's HR website. There might be some opportunities there for you too to apply for your student, which can be awesome. So think about that as well. Documents, senior folder. It's there. We just ask your student to pull up the senior folder. I think that's the best way to get to it. Those forms are the important ones. As Ms. Houston mentioned, transcript release form, that is like #1 priority form because that goes to Ms. Gepa and we can't send the transcripts out without that form. Teacher recommendation form is very, very crucial as well because the teachers need to know the dates that they're sending it by. Generally speaking, the teachers are really on top of it. Some of them were hounding us at the start of the school year. When can I get them in? When can I get them in? There's no schools in Naviance. And they want to be on top of it because they have a lot to do as well. But it's important for them to have those dates just in case. Or maybe a student decides, hey, I actually do want to apply to the school regular decision. They can email them after the fact too, in the same way that, Ms. Gepa will take another transcript release form with more schools. It's definitely important for a student to send their teacher a new form or a new update with a new school that they're applying to if they choose to apply to another school down the road or change the list at all, maybe not apply to a school, so on and so forth. Senior folder, that's where to go to. You can also go to the Belmont's website, although the Belmont's website isn't working so well, and we're getting a lot of dead links that I've noticed. I was experimenting with it, so I'm not sure if the direct link actually works right now. And we're going to eventually have this video posted sooner than later to the website, so I'm going to make sure all of that's in order, although I don't have access to controlling that. I just want to put that on your radar that it's better to just ask your student to pull up the senior folder. Cool. And yeah, I guess now is the Q&A time. We are well under our allotted time. I'm going to pull up the list on my end and I'll mute myself while I do that. And if you as parents have more questions to ask, please feel free to use the Q&A right now. So once again, the little shapes down on the bottom right, there's a triangle, a square, and a circle, at least for me. Click on that, then you go to the Q&A. Bing, bang, boom, ask a question. We'll kind of answer them. We have a running list, and then if more come up, we'll do our best to answer them. And if not, if we don't have time to answer them, we'll answer them and give you the answers within the week. Yeah, next week.
Mr. Pitts, do you want me to start? I have it up. Great, awesome. Okay, so the first question we received is there a way for kids to know their recommendations, teachers, and guidance are done without nagging their recommender? First off, thank you for not nagging us, but it's also our job to be nagged. So feel free to reach out and send us an email. However, I do believe Mr. Pitts was talking about the check marks on Common App. Okay, so when things are checked by guidance, you should see a green check there. I believe that's under each college's individual platform. Okay, so play around with Naviance, see the green check marks so you can, I'm sorry, not Naviance, Common App. Play around with Common App, see the green check marks under every college. That tells you that their documents were sent. Okay. The next one, I'll read it out loud, and then Mr. Pitts or Mr. Houston, you can go for it. If it's an unweighted GPA out of 4.0, why is an A plus a 4.33? Who wants to handle this one?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. That is a little confusing, right? We listed as such, and actually in Common App, Naviance, all the tools that they're applying to schools, even if it's a self-report school, like a UC school, or I think Northeastern does self-report, it will only give a 4.0 scale or a 5.0 scale. There's no 4.33. A 4.0 scale is based on an A being a 4.0. It's what they use in college. There's no A pluses in college. So actually an A, if a student had all straight A's, it would be a 4.0, but an A plus, because we have that extra step, it boosts it up to a maximum of a 4.33. Doesn't make sense why it's called a 4.0 scale, because they're basing it off of an A, even though we have an A plus, but it is what it is. Hopefully that answers it.
I think that's great. One that just came in. What role do you play if a student is being recruited for athletes? Ms. Houston, do you feel like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually was a recruited athlete myself for my process. So, I mean, things have changed obviously a lot since then because it was a while back. But, I think that the main piece of the process is going to be, if a student is being recruited, is going to be handled probably by the coach. Their student's current coach, but we can certainly help, sort of help a student sort of navigate that in terms of, if they're being recruited, where they're looking, what their priorities are. Sometimes students are asked to apply early decision, talking them through that process. And making sure that they get all of their information in. It depends on the individual student. It depends on what division a student is applying for in terms of like having a verbal offer versus like a national letter of intent that is signed for more like Division 1. So again, they're more individualized process, but we can certainly help students sort of navigate that. And it's important that students are also registered with the NCAA so that we can upload transcripts, because that has to be, that's a piece of sort of the recruitment process. But again, we can talk to your student individually about their process, but we're more than willing to help in any way that we can.
Thank you, Ms. Houston. Okay, so another one came in through the Q&A. What support do you offer to students applying to international schools? To be super blunt about it, the same support as for any student, right? So if your student is applying to international schools, one thing I say to my students is, hey, I may not have all the answers, but I will help you figure it out. Okay, so depending on if it's the UK, if it's Ireland, etc., there's a different process. There's a different system. I know the most popular one is a lot of students apply to UK schools and they use what's called the UCAS, the UCAS system for applying. We're pretty well versed with that, but we always like to check the college's website, get a refresher, working with your student and make sure that they have all the parts of the application they need. So yeah, it doesn't come as easy to us as US schools, but we are here to assist your student in any way, shape, or form with whatever they need.
And just one more note about that too. So transcripts usually get sent out a little differently. Some of the international schools will use a digital system. There are a couple that use Common App. In fact, one of my students today, I think, was looking at a school that was in the UK, but isn't UCAS school, and they're in Common App. And I was like, oh, well, that's cool. That's convenient. Hopefully, maybe more of them will go to that in the future. But if they have a digital tool, we kind of work. It's in Naviance, which is great. All of the schools in general are going to be in Naviance. And there's a cool little feature. If your student goes into Naviance and has an international school, they go to the colleges that I'm applying to, there'll be an icon by it. One of the icons has a little TV or a computer screen. I don't know what it's supposed to represent. I guess a computer screen. It will say CA. That means Common App. If it's a little computer screen, blank with just a white screen, that means it has a digital format but doesn't use Common App. So the California UC schools in California use that. UCAS has, I believe, digital, or yeah, they have digital. But it shows that if it's a school like Georgetown, right, it will have that. And then there's another one that's like a little box with orange little white lines going through it. It kind of means snail mail. And literally what we have to do is mail out those applications. So definitely if your students applying to those, we'll have a conversation with them. It'll be working with Ms. Gepa to make sure everything gets sent out on time to the right place. We'll need your students' involvement to make sure the admissions process is good to go with that. But we'll get the transcripts out to them the same way, like Ms. Cake said, we're here to support. And it's no less than if your student's applying Common App or whatever it is. It is different depending on the school and the country and their requirements, but we're here to help and learn too.
Okay, so it is 7:33. Oh, and there's another question in the chat. And thank you guys. Please keep them coming. Okay, so this one that just popped up, does GPA get recalculated after getting Q1 and Q2 grades, or GPA will not change? BHS will just send colleges updated grades. I think I understand the question. Ms. Houston, do you want to field this one?
Sure. So the GPA will change according to the first quarter and the second quarter grades. Obviously, it's a percentage, right? So like while you're having the GPA that is for your full freshman year, your full sophomore year, your full junior year, you are only, recalculating with a quarter of your senior year, right? So that is factored in, but the GPA will change based on the updated grades each time. So the quarter one or the semester grades, and then obviously the final year grades as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions before we log off? Okay. I don't see any coming through. We thank you so much for coming tonight. As we've said multiple times, we will have this PowerPoint posted sometime next week, sooner rather than later, and then also a recording of this. So if you have a friend or a family that couldn't make it tonight, they will have this information, and you will have this information that you can refer back to. Please reach out to your students' guidance counselors if you have any questions, and then also have your student reach out if they have any questions. Remember, we want to meet with all of them regardless of their path, regardless of the amount of support they need. We just want to know what they're doing and how we can support them. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Have a great night.